Hi there folks, welcome back to the IB and Andy Finch channel. I hope you're doing really well. Please don't forget, before you watch the rest of this review, to subscribe to this channel. That way you'll be kept in touch with all the news, all the reviews, all the stuff that we've got going on in our little corner of YouTube. If you're already a subscriber, thank you very much. We are very grateful to see you back here again. We get asked loads of cool questions in the comments section. It's always something that we like to have a look around, see what people are asking. And I'd say one of the most common questions I get asked these days as a river angler is, I'm only going to buy one rod to do a bit of everything with. What should I buy? I've always sort of struggled to answer that question with anything more than buy two rods, because there isn't something, in my opinion, out there so far that's been good enough to do both of the options, both Euro nymphing and dry fly stroke duo fishing. So I was really excited to see the new Greys catalogue come out at the back end of last year and see that there's a rod in there that I knew straight away I was going to be interested in having a look at. It just stood out like a sore thumb on the page. Greys is owned by Hardy, owned by a much bigger company called Pure Fishing, and a lot of their design work now has been done by a world champion fly angler in the UK called Howard Croston. And I kind of looked at this and thought, if there's one person in the world I'd want to have a look at designing that rod, it's probably Howard, because I think he's going to think it through. I think that you're going to end up with a product that should be pretty good. There's one thing looking at this on paper, there's another thing actually getting one and testing it out, but that is what we have done for the start of the season so far. You guys have seen in a couple of the videos, particularly the ones where I went down to Wales, I've been using the Greys Wing Streamflex Plus 9-for-8 to 10-for-8 to 2 to 3 weight fly rod for a little bit of everything for the last few months. It's been really interesting to test this one. I've really got my teeth stuck into this because it's a rod that I just looked at and thought, if this is good, if this is a really good rod, this fills a gap in the market that I just don't think any of the other brands have quite filled quite as capably. So I spent a couple of months casting away with this, fishing away with this, and I'm at the point now where I can tell you guys what I think of the Wing Streamflex Plus. Same format as ever with the review. I'm going to go through it, I'm going to basically unbox it, sort of show you what we've got here, and then I'll go back through again, I'll talk about those features, I talked about my experience fishing with it, and at the end of it we'll figure out whether this rod can justify not only its price tag, because it's not a cheap fishing rod, but also if it can justify my excitement of possibly there being a rod that just fills a gap that no one else has quite managed. So we're going to get straight stuck into this one, and we're going to start with the tube. It comes like that, so pretty standard stuff, fairly hard plastic tube, bit of cordura or something over the top. It's absolutely fine for a mid-range rod. It's pretty much what you'd expect. It's solid enough. You could throw that in a suitcase or something, be absolutely fine. No fancy aluminium or anything on this one. It is all plasticky stuff, but again, it feels pretty solid. I'm sure that will be absolutely fine. Park that to one side for the moment. Obviously on the tube, you're not getting any straps or anything like that, but does anyone ever really use the straps on a rod tube? I certainly don't. Comes in a rod bag rather than a partition tube. 4-piece rod, as you'd expect. We'll pop this straight out. You see there's a very strong black and red theme here with the new Wing Streamflex range. I must admit, Wing Streamflex was a bit of a surprise, but I know that Greys are having a bit more of a push in the American market, so I imagine they needed something that sounded a bit fancier. Here we go. I'd say 4-piece rod, currently set at its 9-foot-8-inch configuration, which I would regard as being either the dry fly configuration, or actually I have used this at the shorter length to do a little bit of nymphing in the smaller streams. We'll start down at this end, down at the butt end, because that's where most of the stuff is going on. And we'll start right at the very bottom with the reel seat. And straight away, there's a little feature on here that I quite enjoyed actually. Do you know with most reel seats, the foot holder, there's a word for that, the bit that holds the reel foot kind of spins around and you spend a couple of minutes trying to line it up. This actually doesn't. It's not quite round. There's a little kind of recessed edge that the reel seat fits on, so it never twists. So you can just whack a reel straight in there. Turn the double locking nuts straight up there. You haven't got to look at what you're doing pretty much. Really simple. It's one of those little features you look at and think, why has no one else thought of that? That's pretty obvious. It just saves you a little bit of time, makes it easier. Everything's made out of aluminium. It looks pretty nice. There's a little bit of branding on there as well. Just at the bottom there, we've got a little logo on the butt cap. Now the butt cap is something we're going to talk about in a second, but not just yet. We've got a little wooden spacer in here. I don't know what kind of wood it is. It's not particularly fancy. It sort of reminds me of the wood that you got on a 90s and early 2000s school desk. Now, kids of my age, you will understand what I mean by that. It's absolutely fine, it is what it is. Now I am going to go backwards a step here and just talk about this little butt cap, because this is actually screw threaded, and if I unscrew that, it's quite a long screw thread, I'll get there. This is where your 12-inch extension piece sits for when you want to make the rod a little bit longer. It actually sits inside the handle here. Very long screw thread, keeps everything really safe, never had any water ingress, nice features. I'm actually going to keep this extension piece back out for the moment. Screw that back up. We're going to park him to one side just for the time being. Half-well's handle, very, very slim half-well's handle, cork with a little bit of composite down at the bottom just to make sure there's no chipping or anything falling off the edge there. It is a very slim handle actually, but I think it fits really nicely in the hand. It makes it feel like a bit more of a wand than a big chunky thing. Come up from there, got a nice little keeper ring on there. Thank you very much, Hardy Greys. Like a keeper ring on this channel. And then you come up to all your branding. This is a pretty different looking Streamflex rods. Now, I'm old enough now, and I think I count as old these days, that I remember the old classic Streamflex kind of olivey brown colour, really traditional looking rod. And that's always been sort of my vision of a Streamflex. So this is a pretty big departure from that. You can't miss it, that's for sure. It stands out like a sore thumb. So they've gone for this slightly heavier branding, the slightly heavier colours and stuff like that. Again, they are trying to hit different markets now with Greys. So perhaps the traditional British fly angler probably isn't the first person on the list. Finish looks absolutely fine. It's the sort of finish you'd expect for a rod at this price point, I reckon. I really, really like the matte finish on the rest of the blank. I think that's really cool. It's not shiny, it's not flashy. I think it's pretty much what you'd want for a river rod in terms of that finish. I wish more rods, I wish more manufacturers would go down this sort of route. With this being a rod that's got nymphing in mind, you do have a butt guide down here on the butt section that is fairly close to where your reel is going to sit. As we've talked about on the channel before, having that first guide a little bit close to the reel just minimises the amount of line taking you get down here. So for a rod that's been designed for both dry fly and nymph fishing, I think that is the right thing to do. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later as well. Coming up the rod, we do have rod alignment markers on here, so if you're really picky about how you get your rod lined up, it's very, very easy to do with dots and lines. You also have an area on each section just to tell you which rod it is that you're using. It feels a bit overkill to me, but it is what it is. And as we go up here, very, very simple black whippings, relatively small single foot guides. These aren't fancy Seracors or anything like that. These are just straightforward, lightweight, chromed guides, and they're absolutely fine right the way through to the tip section, where again, we've still got these very, very small single legs up until the second last guide, which is a snake. Now again, for a rod that's designed for fishing mono leaders, for nymphing particularly, that's not unusual these days. Pretty standard feature. It means that if the line's getting wrapped around the tip, it can slide over the snake guides more effectively than it can if it gets stuck around a single foot. So you'd expect to find that there on a nymphing rod. And then just up at the tip here, we've just got something a little bit different. We've got a bright red metallic whipping up on the tip section there. No idea why. It looks pretty fancy. It is what it is. 4+1 pieces. I've just weighed it at 97 grams at its full length and 91 grams at the shorter kind of dry fly configuration at 9'8". Just out of interest actually, I did weigh that butt cap as well, and that butt cap, because it's quite heavy, because it's quite a sturdy thing, that weighs 8 grams, so almost 10% of the weight of the entire rod, when it's that shorter length, is just that heavy butt cap that's built to hold the dolly butt section. It's a little bit surprised with that, but it does feel sturdy. I guess that does need to be built right, because you don't want that going wrong, particularly if you stood in the middle of a river. It feels light in the hand. That Powerlux material, which I assume is very similar to the stuff that 3M provide to Harding for the Cintrix. It feels really balanced. It gives you the sort of experience you'd expect from a rod at this price point, sat where the Greys Wing Streamflex Plus is at the moment. So that is exactly what you've got there. What I want to do now is just go through a few of these bits again, just explain my experiences with it, and then we'll get on to talking about what I think about the rod as a package. We're going to come back down here to the butt section. I really, really like the idea of storing that dolly butt in there and it having no guides on it, so you can chop and change it pretty quickly. One thing I will say is that you have to be a little bit careful with this screw thread down here. If you tighten this up too tight, it's actually incredibly hard to unscrew it again. There's been a couple of times where I've had to use forceps to get this open. It does have kind of a beveled edge to it, so you get a bit more grip on it, but I certainly wouldn't over tighten it, because otherwise you just can't get it undone again. As I said, reel seat performance absolutely flawless. I was a little bit surprised to see it as an up locker and not a down locker with this being an nymphing rod. But I guess with all that extra weight down here with that butt cap anyway, as I say, 8 grams, that's quite a sturdy thing on a fly rod. It actually balanced out pretty well, it was fine. I think that is actually making a fairly big difference there in terms of just getting good balance on the rod. No issues at all with the spacer, it's not swollen, it's not done anything wrong, it's got wet a lot. As I say, it's not particularly fancy, but for the job it's doing, it's absolutely fine. It could have been absolutely anything in truth. The cork on here, I'm going to be honest straight away, for a rod at this price point, I don't think this cork's very good. We've talked about this before on the channel. Increasingly, we're going to find cork harder and harder to get hold of, particularly the higher quality stuff. The number of manufacturers producing good quality cork is decreasing at the moment. There's quite a lot of filler in there. You can tell that it's not the top grade stuff. You wouldn't expect it to be the ultra high grade stuff. It's okay, it's fine, it is what it is, but you know straight away you're not holding the super premium stuff, so don't expect it. As I touched on earlier, the livery and stuff probably isn't quite sort of what I associate with the Streamflex rod, but that's because I'm old. He's getting myself into the 21st century. This is what stuff's going to look like going forwards with Greys. It's absolutely fine. It's making no difference at all to the performance of the rod. And as I say, I do like that slightly more matte finish on the rest of the blank, particularly as a nymph rod. Avoiding that blank flash I think is quite a nice thing, and it does a really good job of that. But as we move up here, I want to talk about what I think really makes this rod stand out, and it was an incredibly brave decision by the guys at Greys to do what they did. Now, this isn't the first one of these rods on the market that has a dolly butt section that fits in. In fact, it's not even the first one, I think, to have a dolly butt that screws in. Almost all of the rods that I'd seen previously had a dolly butt section, but also had the butt guide on the third section, which meant that when you installed this dolly butt, you then took the butt guide an extra 12 inches away from the reel. Now, if that butt guide was on the third section, it was already too far away from the reel anyway, and you're already going to get more sag. By installing that extra section there, all you're doing is making that problem even worse. And I always in the back of my mind thought that actually the right thing to do here, the correct thing to do in terms of making this rod, is to fit this out more as a nymphing rod than as a dry fly rod. Because I think the nymph specific features are probably more important than just the casting stick features of a fly rod. The problem is I hadn't found many manufacturers, in fact I can't think of any so far, that have been brave enough to make this decision to put that butt guide that close on a rod that they are saying is also designed for fly line fishing. It is exactly the right thing to do. I am absolutely convinced of it. It does mean the rod, when you first set it up in the 9'6" 3-weight configuration, or 9'8" 3-weight configuration, that looks a little bit weird. I'm not going to lie. Having those two guides that close together down here in comparison to these two guides, it looks a little bit weird, don't get me wrong. I've not found it's had any impact on my ability to shoot fly line at all. But what it has done is meant that when I'm nymphing, I'm not battling with saggy mono down here or saggy nymphing fly line. And for me, that is far, far more important. All of the models that I'd seen previously that have gone down this sort of route, I just don't think have been good enough nymphing rods because they haven't had those features. Whereas the guys at Greys designed this as a nymphing rod that you can throw fly line with. And for me, that's the right way round. And what makes this rod stand out above anything else I've seen on the market, I've not seen them all, but what makes this stand out to me above everything else on the market is the fact that they have designed it, in my opinion, the correct way round. They've made a really good nymphing rod that does also throw fly line nicely. I'm going to slide that little dolly section back on for the moment because to start with, we are going to talk about my experience with this rod as a nymphing rod. Off the back of what I've just said, I think it's the most important thing. I've used this with both a longer French leader, a couple actually, a 9-metre and a 15-metre French leader, and I've done some Spanish leader stuff with it as well with level fine monofilament. It's a really solid nymphing rod. It's very, very good. Perhaps not quite got the super sensitivity that you might expect from a nymphing rod at this price point, but it's got a whole other usage that the other nymphing rods at this price point don't get. It's probably not quite as fast in the tip as you might expect from a high-end nymphing rod, but this isn't a high-end nymphing rod. It is a very, very good contender at the 10'8". Really, really good rod for the bigger rivers. I really like this rod at 10'8", and I think even though it isn't the perfect Euro nymphing rod, I think it's very, very good. And allied to what I'm going to come on to next, I think that's more than good enough to justify the rod. At 10'8", you start to worry about stuff like swing weight with rods at this price point, but actually, because of this heavy little butt cap, it does balance really nicely in the hand when it's fully set up. I found actually the Greys Title 3/4 reel, the little Greys Title, actually balance this absolutely perfectly. So if you're into your rod balancing stuff, I know not everyone is, so that little Title made it really comfortable to fish with this at fairly long range all day. Like I said, not mega sensitive, but pretty good. Not mega fast in the tip, but pretty good. Not mega lightweight, but pretty good. It's a really, really solid nymphing rod. It's a very good nymphing rod. And I think it's really, really helped by those nymph-specific features that they've been brave enough to fit onto the rod. But we are going to take one of those nymph-specific features off for the moment and just talk about this as a fly line rod, specifically as a dry fly rod, because that's what I used it for at 9'8" most of the time. And the feedback here actually is going to be pretty similar to the feedback I just gave you as a nymphing rod. It is a very, very serviceable dry fly rod. It's got an action that I really like. I'd call it sort of mid-actioned at the 9'8". It's not mega fast. It doesn't need to be. No one needs a super fast action 2 to 3 weight. It's just not a thing that needs to exist. What it does do really nicely is cushion light tippets, and we've done a lot of fishing so far this year particularly in April with smaller flies, catching a lot of fish on midges and stuff like that. We've been using 7x, so we're down like 2.5 pound tippet. And having something with a nice soft tip section, like this thing's got, really nice delicate tip section that can cushion the strikes of the 7x, cushion the lunges on the bigger fish, that's been absolutely invaluable. So again, if you're a river angler who's fishing with lighter tippets and stuff like that, absolutely no worries with this thing at all. It really does cushion that stuff well. It's exactly what it's designed to do. I fished it mostly with a 3-weight fly line. I will say the fly line that I use with this thing does not get the most out of it. I actually gambled on buying a 3-weight max catch single hand spey. It does not work well with this rod because the guides up here are so thin. They're fairly Euro nymphing line specific guides. They are very, very thin, and that single hand spey has the thickest back end of the head section. I just couldn't shoot anything through it. What it did give me a chance to do is do a lot of roll casting with it, and it's a gorgeous roll casting rod. Absolutely pings a roll cast. Again, I like that nice middle action, just give you a bit of feel when you're making those 30-40 feet roll casts. But it was not the right line to put on this rod. You're going to want something slightly finer, probably more standard headed fly line than that single hand spey. It was just way too thick. That's the only 3-weight line I own, so because of that I did actually try a 4 in it as well. The 4-weight was a little bit too heavy for it, I will say that. I think a sensible weight 3, a kind of AFTM standard 3, is probably going to be about right for most casters on this thing. Throwing the line slightly longer distance, there was a little bit of tip wobble. You'd sort of expect that. This isn't a rod that's designed to cast 50, 60, 70 feet. It's a 9'8", 2 to 3 weight. This is a rod for doing searching work up close. It's a short and medium range. It eats that stuff alive. It's a very, very capable dry fly rod. If you're looking for a rod that's going to punch a 20-foot leader into a wind at 50, 60, 70 feet, you shouldn't be expecting this rod to do it. It definitely cannot. If you're popping short to medium range casts up nice glassy flats and stuff like that, spinner fall evenings, yeah, absolutely spot on. I really like this thing as a dry fly rod. So we end up in a pretty interesting situation here at this point in the review, where for the price tag on this rod, and the retail price at the moment is £450, this is not a cheap fly rod by any stretch. We're about mid-range now. If the top end is £1,000, and that seems to be the level these days, then 450 is pretty much bang in the mid-range section. I don't think this is the best nymphing rod available for £450, and I don't think this is the best dry fly rod available for £450. But it is both of those things. It is very, very capable of both of those things. I'll tell you what, hats off to the guys at Hardy Greys, because there is some serious thought gone into that. And as I say, particularly putting that book guide there is an incredibly brave decision. It would have been so easy to just go, oh no, let's stick it where it's always been, and we'll just sell this rod off the fact that it's got Streamflex written on it. But actually, that is something that I think has absolutely taken this rod from being a good solid option but not spectacular to something that to me completely stands out, completely unique on the market, and a very, very, very good rod for those of you out there who keep asking us, if I'm just going to buy one rod, what should I buy? At the moment, from what I've seen on the market, you should be buying the Greys Wing Streamflex 9'8", 10'8", 2 to 3 weight. It is a really, really good option. As ever, to justify the price tags on these things, you want to know you're backed up by a good warranty, and attached to the rod bag here is a little booklet where Greys explain to you exactly how to go through the process. What the booklet doesn't do, actually, as far as I've seen, I've just read it through there, is explain the price. But I've just gone onto the Greys website, and it appears to be that in the UK, the warranty service, the postage, handling, packaging, all that stuff is £32.50 to get a new section. So if you do break a section on your Wing Streamflex, it looks like the price is £32.50 to get a new section back to you, which is fantastic. Obviously that relies on Greys having them in stock, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. All the information's in the booklet. Read through it, read through the stuff on the website, but it appears to be the situation is relatively straightforward. They give you the phone number, they give you the address, you send a bit of section back, and for £32.50 back on the water, which to me sounds fairly reasonable. As ever, really, really interested to hear your guys' opinion on the review, to hear your guys' opinion on the new Greys range. Have you got one of the new Wing Streamflex rods? If you have, get in the comment section, let me know your opinions on the rod so far. Is this the sort of rod that you've been looking for, that kind of multi-length, multi-use thing? If it is, again, let us know. Has this made you want to go out and have a look at one of these things? You definitely should be doing if you are into this sort of stuff, because as I say, it's probably the best one on the market. It certainly is the best I've seen so far. And let us know if you're the type of person who does just carry one rod. Do you prefer to take one rod and do the rigging when you're switching in between methods? Or do you, like me, tend to take two rods because you hate doing the rigging? Both of those things are absolutely fine. But do let us know in the comment section what your thoughts are. Folks, thank you very much for watching this video. Really appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed it. As I say, get in the comment sections. Let us know what you think. Give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And IB and I are going to see you guys again for some more fishing and stuff very, very soon. Take care, folks.
Bye bye.